Hi, hello. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to yet another bookshop tour with me, Trina, via voiceover introduction. Today I wanted to jump right in and take you with me as I explore Oslo for the first time, and primarily exploring Oslo via its bookshops. I've kind of figured out making these bookshop tours that visiting bookshops and hunting down all the different bookshops in a city tends to take you to some of the busiest and nicest shopping and cafe areas in a city, so we get to see a little bit of Oslo along the way as I explore the bookshops. I've been traveling around a bit. I have other bookshop tours on this channel if it's something that you find fun, but for now, stick with me and enjoy this look into the bookish side of Oslo, Norway. The first day I arrived in Oslo, a lot of the bookshops were actually closed because it was the weekend, but when it was finally Monday and bookshops were reopening, the first one I went to was Tronsmo Bokhandel. You'll notice the actual name in Norwegian is Tronsmo Bokhandel. I'll give you the names in English, but put the actual name on the screen in case you want to search it up properly. I'll give it the actual untranslated name. This place was a great place to start. It was middle of the work week, so it was super empty, and one of the best collections of literary fiction and literary nonfiction, both in Norwegian and in English, that I've ever seen. It was one of those shops where if all of those famous book prizes got together and they vomited up a bookstore just of amazing books, that would be this place. There were also some gorgeous covers. This was the first shop where I started noticing, I'm like, okay, some of these Norwegian English covers are amazing and I love them. They also had a great setup with all of these little rooms or individual spaces for each genre. I picked out a couple of books that I was tempted to buy, but I didn't because it was the very, very first bookshop of the day. So I was like, no, it's too soon. For one, I saw this gorgeous cover of Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. I saw these beautiful Nydia Okafor covers, including this cover of Who Fears Death. That's so much nicer than my cover of Who Fears Death. Oh, and also ignore my wet hair in this clip. It is raining outside throughout this video, and I never remembered to bring an umbrella, but that's my own fault, and we're gonna ignore the hair. I also love that this place, I didn't notice this until right before I was about to leave, but this bookshop has a basement for their graphic novels and comic books to store them in a separate space. So it's kind of like they had a little comic book store within the larger store. Also, look how expensive this copy of Fun Home is. That's crazy. I bought my copy of Fun Home for $1 at a library sale. So it's a good setup, but they were pretty expensive. After leaving Tronsmo, I was on my way to another bookshop right down the street when I got just kind of randomly sidetracked by this sign on the street that said Big Book Sale in Norwegian, Big Book Sale, 3rd floor, and had all of these little arrow signs leading you up to the 3rd floor of the building. So I guess this could have been a kidnapping attempt for book lovers, but I fell for it. I went up there and there were so many really, really cheap, beautiful new books for as low as 60-80 kroner for Norwegian, which is about $4 to $6. Unfortunately, they were all in Norwegian. This seems like a school sale for the area. I don't quite speak Norwegian, so I had to pass and leave, but still such a fun little side quest that I went on. And then I continued on to the actual bookshop I was on my way to, which is Norli. Norli and one other bookstore I mentioned in this video are kind of what I view as the Norwegian Barnes & Noble equivalent in terms of there are many locations and it's massive and has almost every single book you can think of. They had a massive science fiction section, massive English section. They even had sections in Danish, Swedish, Italian, other European languages, pretty much anything you can imagine. And the second floor is entirely textbooks as well, so it's even bigger than just what I show, but I stuck to the first floor. Also, side note, this store was so hot that I ended up having to take off my jacket, which cannot be good for the books, if I'm being honest. Come on, who wants a hot bookstore? The books are just gonna slowly melt. I was so tempted by the cloth-bound editions, but they have those in almost every single bookstore, but yet I am tempted every single time, especially this beautiful copy of The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath that was illustrated. So stunning. So many stunning books. They were all mostly full price. There were a couple of sale books, but again, they primarily put the Norwegian language books on sale, not the English language books, which is totally fine, but it just meant that I was able to resist buying anything. This place was so big that they actually had signs everywhere pointing both to the register and to the exit because it was kind of like a maze. I got jump scared by this mannequin in the front entrance. I thought it was an actual person for a second. Literally massive, beautiful store. I definitely want to go to other Norli locations around Norway as I travel. And then to kind of follow up on that, just a couple of doors down, they had the Norli antique versions. I believe by the same company or the same book shop, but basically all their used and antique books had a separate location right next door. This place was gorgeous. This is like, if I had a personal library, this is how I'd set it up. Just like stacks of books and parchment every which way in all sorts of stacks combined with like art and textbooks and an organization based on vibe with books stacked up to the ceiling. Literally my dream setup, absolutely. Not a ton of fiction books here, although they did have fun categories for their nonfiction, like polar books and books about Svalbard and other things like that. But I did manage to find a tiny little English corner of the bookstore, like up on their second floor in a corner. It was literally called the English corner, and it was very much just a corner with a few English books, which is really fun, you know, to see what options are left over. A gorgeous old copy of David Copperfield was here, a bunch of really old sci-fi books that I'd never heard of that I could add to my TBR that I thought was pretty interesting. So yeah, great vibes. I love this used bookstore, and I love that they have separated it out kind of from the larger new bookstore. I was so worried about not having enough bookstores, and it turns out I just keep running into book sales on every single corner. It's like living in DC again. We had a little break from the rain, so I felt like it was safe to walk to the next bookstore on my list, which was a place called Books and Media AS. I didn't really know what to expect here, but I got really excited when I came up and there was a sign on the outside that said moving sale, flyttesal. I was like, yes, cheap books, sale, yes. Unfortunately, this place, I didn't realize when I was looking up online, is, I believe, just a Christian bookstore. It pretty much only has Christian religious books. So I left pretty quickly just because I'm not religious, and that's not how I'm looking to build my reading collection. But if you're into religious reading, I would definitely stop by before they shut down entirely. But luckily, right across from Books and Media, there was another bookstore cafe combo whose name I couldn't really find, but it's in the Cappelen mall area. So it's a Cappelen bookshop and cafe combo. It really is set up in a way that you can have little alcoves to drink your tea in. You can browse books while sitting with a coffee and everything like that. And I really like that setup. I thought it was really sweet. It was a little bit more open concept than I like my bookstores. You know, I like my bookstores like to be a maze of books, but I still had a really good time here. And I added a couple of nonfictions to my TBR from here. And I do think it feels like a great study space, like stop space, and less of a bookstore space. Honestly, as far as chai lattes goes, not the worst taste. There were just a bunch of like sticks and like loose pieces in it. I'm like, I need to find a place in this city that doesn't use bagged chai for the lattes. Like a pre-concentrate is usually so much better. But the next stop was the most successful of the day, I think, objectively, just because it was the only place where I actually ended up buying something. The next bookstore on my list was Cappellens Forslag, which was a really small bookstore. It's one single room, basically, with one little couch, and they do have a coffee machine, but it's primarily just a single room of used books only. And when I tell you, I loved this place. This is exactly what I was looking for. I was just complaining about open concept. This is the opposite of open concept. Or maybe it's so much so open concept that it becomes literally a single room. But I loved it. I saw this copy of the Book of Coley, but this was actually before I read M.R. Carey's other book, Infinity Gate, so I didn't end up buying the Book of Coley, and I seriously regret that now, because now I want to read everything M.R. Carey writes, because I loved Infinity Gate so much. But I did find this copy of There by Tommy Orange that I may or may not have purchased. Overall, this was a great spot. They had speakers built into the bookshop playing vinyl music, little signs and stickers everywhere, a special little new arrivals section with this copy of the summer book by Tove Jansson that I almost bought just for this note on the inside cover from a mom to her daughter. I kind of almost sobbed over this note from 2004. I thought it was so sweet, and that's why I love used bookstores as much as I do, because you can find things like that. The next bookstores on my list were 3 together, and I may or may not have taken a lunch break somewhere in the middle here. Trust me, I didn't just go all day. I did take a couple of breaks. But with this next collection of bookstores, unfortunately the first one was closed. It was Schaus Books. I have some clips here of me being a stalker on the outside, trying to see what it looks like inside, and it looks like a great used book sale setup. So if you're in the area, I would stop by, but I did not get the chance because they weren't open until I was already leaving the city. But literally right down the road, there were 2 more bookstores. The first one was a children's bookstore called Svovel. It was a kid's bookstore, like I said, so I didn't buy anything, but I still thought it was a cute, look around, and it's connected to the next bookstore on the list. That's why I'm also bringing it up. They had a little pinball machine set up. They had books going up to as high as middle grade and a couple of YA books. I'm really glad I stopped by here, even though it wasn't for me, just because it was really cute. I love a kids bookstore. I love spaces specifically dedicated to kids. But from Svovel, then it was literally right next door. Their partner bookstore is Prismatic Pages, which is an English language bookstore only. So they only had English books. This was a space that's centered primarily queer, feminist, anti-racist writings for the most part. It reminded me a lot of some of my favorite bookstores in San Francisco, specifically Fabulosa. If you saw my San Francisco bookstore tour, a lot of crossover with books just with the UK covers here versus there, which I thought was fun. It's fun to see how people's tastes are the same across the world. But they had a mixture of new and used books on the shelves, so you kind of didn't know what you're getting into until you picked one up. Like, there were this copy of Ready Player One that was used for a little bit cheaper, but even their used books were still just a little bit higher priced than I like to get my used books. I'm kind of a cheapskate. Like, for example, I really did want a copy of Stag Dance. I still want a copy of Stag Dance. It's been on my TBR all spring, but it's only out in hardcover and they're so expensive, especially in Norway right now, so I had to skip out on that. Also, I swear someone who works here must watch the Book Leo, because there was one bookshelf that was just books that I've seen in the Book Leo's videos, which I thought was pretty funny. Also, can we talk about how Andrew Joseph White's books are only in hardcover in the US? And they are out in paperback in the EU, because I was forced to buy all of them in hardcover because I thought they were only available in hardcover. And it turns out I could have just waited 6 months and bought them all in paperback here. So thanks a lot, US publishers of Andrew Joseph White. This was the point where I and my legs gave up on walking. I took a bus, then unpictured in the video, but I did take a bus to the next collection of bookstores that were near each other. Starting off, I stopped by a place called Sagene Bokhandel. This was good vibes. It was a cute place. They had a little English section that I could look through. I added quite a few of these to my TBR, and some of them were already on my TBR. For example, Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl is a book that I've meant to read for ages, and I kind of regret not buying it because I did love that cover. They also had some gorgeous covers of the Wizard of Earthsea books and of classics with these cloth-bound covers that I've never seen before. So a lot to look at, a lot to love. It was also coupled with a stationery supplies puzzles section at the back of the store, as well as having their book displays up in the front. But the other bookstore in this area was the one that I really got excited about. I went to Sagene's antique rare bookstore, which was nearby in the same area of Oslo. And oh my god, I love this place. Just from these clips, I don't know if I can capture the feeling of just being absolutely buried in books. The goal of this bookstore is to leave enough space for people to walk in and fill everything else with books, and even then the walking part is 50-50, not that important. More important, books. They also had pretty decent prices for used books here, and the guy at the front was so friendly. I wanted to actually get all 3 Farseer trilogy books used because they came in a set, they looked perfect, they were really cheap. But this bookstore only takes Vipps, which is an app that you have to like be a resident in Norway for, or cash. And I was dumb and didn't bring my wallet with cash in it. So I couldn't buy the books I wanted to, but I will be coming back here with cash at some point because there were so many great books. They did have a very overflowing crime book section. I'm not really big into crime books, but that's just classic Scandinavia, that the crime book section will always be the largest here. And I thought it was so funny. There was like no room to stand in the crime book room. Clearly, I love this place. I want to go back. I recommend going by if you are in the Oslo area. It's not even in the city center, so it's not the hardest to drive to if you are just passing by the city. And there goes my bus without me. Okay, luckily we're not in the US, so there's gonna be another bus in like 10 minutes. We'll survive. I did finally find the bus that I needed to find to go to the next couple bookstores. We're getting so close to the end, I promise. But there were so many good ones. Then this next bookstore was another one-room bookstore with a huge amount of books displayed, but just like a pretty small space overall, called Bislett. I can say now, on being on like my 10th bookstore of Oslo, pretty standard bookstore, but I still gave it a little browse. And there was this gorgeous book about Tove Jansson's art and illustrations that I may or may not get in the future as a coffee table book. But my phone did die while I was in this bookstore, and I had to run out and find a cafe to charge it in, so less footage, but I still liked it. This place is massive. All right, I think we only have 2 more bookstores left. And they are 2 big, massive bookstores, to be fair, but 2 more left. The first one is a place called Tanum Litteraturhus. This place was massive. It was like a huge building because it's a bookstore comboed with a restaurant, comboed probably with some other stuff. But I'd mostly just focused on the little bookstore section where they had ladders. I love a ladder leaning up against a bookshelf. It's full Beauty and the Beast vibes. I loved it so, so much. They also had a little Norwegian books in English section, which I thought was a really fun idea that I hadn't seen anywhere else, where specifically their most well-known Norwegian authors, their most well-known Norwegian books, but the translations for tourists like myself. They also had gorgeous covers of books like Betty and Tipping the Velvet that I've read, and I was like, oh, these are covers that I could definitely add to my wish list of wanting to get. But I did just keep it short and sweet because I was starting to get really, really hungry. But then I continued walking on for the very last bookstore for this tour, which is actually one I hinted at earlier. It's the other bookstore that I would say is comparable to Barnes & Noble in Norway, and that is ARK Bokshop. And this is actually their flagship store, like the very first store of ARK. And I've been to other ARKs across Norway, so I know how many there are, but this is the home store, which I thought was a fun extra fact to get. They did have a obligatory massive crime book section, which I've come to expect from Norwegian countries. It's not my personal favorite genre, but if you are into thriller crime novels, I definitely recommend going to Scandinavia to buy them because they have so many, including ones translated into English. They also had this gorgeous copy of The Hobbit, illustrated by Tove Jansson, who writes the Moomins books. And I had no idea she illustrated a copy of The Hobbit. This one was in Norwegian, but I'm like, surely I can find a copy in either English or Swedish that she's also illustrated, because I thought it was so cool. I love her art style. There were so many fiction books, fantasy books. I like the way they categorized them out. It was pretty easy to find books based on genre. I found this copy of Belladonna, and I love the EU copy is pink. I think the US copy is purple. I've been meaning to read Belladonna. Has anyone read that? Tell me in the comments if you read Belladonna and recommend it, because I have had it on my TBR and I've heard mixed things, but I'm low-key really into the concept and want to give it a shot. So let me know if you've read that and you can recommend. There were also so many fantasy books in English, very niche fantasy books that I've never heard of. I look at some Martha Wells books that I haven't heard of because I've just recently read my first Martha Wells and I've really enjoyed them, so I'm like, maybe I look for some more. And there were also obviously all the Robin Hobb books, which is instantly enough to make me say, okay, this is a good fantasy section. Just need to have Robin Hobb and I'm content. I spent like probably 10 minutes just on Goodreads adding stuff to my TBR while standing in front of the bookshelves, so lots of options. I picked up a kebab and now I'm going home. That's enough bookstores for one day. Those are all the bookstores I visited, but as a last little note, I did want to shout out the Oslo system of little libraries. I've seen in other countries and obviously in the US, the concept of little free libraries where you drop off books and you pick up books a lot, but this is the first place I've ever seen them built into old phone booths. Basically, Oslo has converted their old phone booths into little free libraries all over the city. I ran into 3 different locations of them, and I know that there are more of them, where you can like go inside this phone booth and there are several stacks of books. Mostly Norwegian, but there were some English books too. I didn't take any because I didn't have any to trade. I thought that was such a fun way to reuse these old phone booths. And when I went to the National Museum the day after, I got to see what one of those phone booths looked like when they were in use as a phone booth. So I thought that was like a fun added fact. They had one of them in the museum, but they also have them out and about and filled with books, which just, I love. I loved Oslo. I love visiting. Such a great city, and I can't wait to go back in the future, see the bookshops that were closed when I was there, and revisit the bookshops that I did go to with more money. But thanks for sticking around with the voiceover. I'll pass it off to me back at home to sign off. Well, did you have a good time? Thank you so much for coming along on my bookshop tour of Oslo. I hope you enjoyed seeing bookshops in a part of the world different than when you're at, or if you're planning on going to Oslo, I hope you visit some of the bookshops I mentioned, especially the one that was closed, because I want to go back there and visit that one. I had a really good time with this bookshop tour. No hate to Gothenburg, obviously that's my hometown, but that bookshop tour like exhausted me for some reason. I like didn't necessarily even enjoy like fully filming it, but this time I really had a good time going through Oslo. It's such a fun city. I find there's not a ton of cars in the streets. They have really good public transportation, and there's a lot of people. As soon as the sun comes out, everybody's out in the streets. As soon as it started raining, the place was dead. But like when the sun is out, I think Oslo is stunning, and I had a really, really good time. I didn't buy a ton of stuff on this trip. Honestly, maybe the key to avoiding overspending, visit bookshops in a country where you don't speak the main language. Because the majority of what I bought was bookmarks. Most of these I didn't have to buy because the places were really amazing, but getting bookmarks and little pieces of like merch from different bookstores is what I really like to do when I visit. Even if I can't buy a book, then I like to buy like a sticker or something small from the place, or just ask for a bookmark. But I did buy one book that I just wanted to mention. I bought There by Tommy Orange. As you can see, I already read it because I bought it solely since I was in the middle of reading it. Like I was reading it on my Kindle. I had to check out from the library. And then I came across it in a bookstore with the European cover, by the way, which this is what the US cover looks like, which I really love as well. So I was kind of questioning whether or not I should get this, but I've become very fond of this cover since getting it, especially this like beige background to it I love. I've already erased the price out of the inside, but it was only like $6.50 US dollars, like 70 Norwegian krone. I was like, that's a stunning deal. Absolutely give it to me. And I really enjoyed finishing the book with the physical copy to get to like annotate and underline in and all of that. So I'm really, really happy I managed to find that. Shout out to that bookstore. Shout out to Cappellens. But yeah, that was the whole tour. Thank you so much for watching, for joining. If you have any suggestions for other cities or book sales or book locations, especially with used books, anywhere in Europe or in the US, please let me know. I love a bookstore more than anything. That is like, I love a book, but going into bookstores is one of my favorite things. And it's taken me a long time to get to the point where I can do it without buying a ton of books. Now I'm like very picky. So please feel free to share any recommendations in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, as usual, whatever you want to do. And I guess I'll see you in the next video. Toodles!